Welcome, I'm Denise Graves, and you're watching Opera America's Oral History Project.
So I always start by asking, who brought you to your first opera?
Who brought me to my first opera? Oh, I can't remember, but I didn't see opera as a child. I just went to the New York Philharmonic, to the children's concerts. So opera was nothing in my history.
Do you remember what your first opera experience was, or the first time you saw a performance and you thought, wow, this art form has something to offer?
Well, it wasn't like that. I started working with Kirk Browning, the television director, and he insisted that I work with him at the NBC Opera. And that's how I discovered opera.
At the NBC Opera?
Yes, quite.
Those were some wonderful performances.
They were, darling. They really were.
Wow.
So nice to see you.
So was Kirk the one who brought you into stage direction?
Yes.
As a career?
Well, I was a choreographer, and he led me in a road to stage directing.
And how did that road go from being I guess as a choreographer, you are moving people, and as a stage director, you are moving people.
Yes.
Was that a hard transition to make from choreography into stage direction?
Not at all. Not at all. It was easy.
And was your first stage direction work in theater as opposed to an opera, or did you start out in opera?
I think it was in opera. I think it's always been an opera.
So even though you have a lot of theater credits, opera really was the place where you started directing.
Yes, I would say that.
Wow. But of course, you've done a lot of theater as well.
Yes, I have.
Is there, for you, Rhoda, a big difference directing theater from directing opera, or is it more the same than different?
No, it's similar, but the timing of an opera is based on the music. And in theater, it's based on the freedom of emotional timing.
Do you prefer the freedom of theater, or the, if you will, the constraints of opera that are dictated by the timing of the score? Is there one that makes you just feel more creative as a stage director?
They both make me feel creative. I was just blessed.
Oh, how wonderful. Now, Rhoda, when I think about it, you are, a pioneer in being a woman stage director in opera. There, even today, and there are more than there used to be, but there aren't as many women working as stage directors in opera as there are men. Did you encounter barriers in your career because you were a woman director?
Not that I know of, no. No,
Good.
it was just, it's true, good.
I noticed in your biography that one of your associations that was the longest with a single company was New York City Opera. Yes. Where, of course, you directed, from the early 1980s until the mid 1990s. I counted up 10 productions, but there are probably more.
Wow.
What was it like working at City Opera in those days?
Oh, it was wonderful. And Beverly was wonderful and very supportive of everyone who worked there. It was joyful.
And what made it wonderful and joyful? I was there in the early 1980s too. And I mean, there were huge pressures, and there was never enough time. There was never enough money.
That's correct.
And yet, there was also joy. Where was that joy rooted? What was behind that joy, do you think?
Well, it was doing something you loved with material you loved. And that was the joy of it. And Beverly was wonderful. She was so supportive. She was really a great, great lady.
When a general director, say Beverly, when you describe her as supportive, what made her supportive? How did you know that she was behind you?
There's a fire engine. I live on the second floor and fire engines go by all the time. What made her supportive?
Yeah, how did you know that you were well supported in your work there?
Because she was curious about what you did. She believed in your talent, and she believed in the company.
Mm-hmm.
She was just a wonderful woman, and she had great problems in her family, and I have enormous respect for her.
Yeah.
For her life.
You are so well known, and it was early on in your career at City Opera, for the production of The Life and Times of Malcolm X.
Oh, yes.
And you must be happy to know that it is coming back in a multi-company co-production. It's going to the Metropolitan Opera.
I know. I'm so delighted. It's about time.
Tell us about creating that work. And I know that you were a constant advisor, if you will, to Tony and how it was going. What was it like? Because it was, early mid 1980s, quite revolutionary to have an opera about Malcolm X on the stage. What was the experience like?
Well, Tony is so gifted, and the company was so gifted that it was like doing an opera with incredibly gifted people about a very important man, Malcolm. I was delighted.
It is so great that the opera is going to the Met, and of course, starting at Michigan Opera Theater in Detroit this spring.
Yes, I'm so delighted.
I noticed in the background material that I read that some of your other important productions include Lizzie Borden, yes, of Mice and Men. These are works that premiered and then kind of went away, in a way the way Malcolm X premiered and went away, only to come back. And as Lizzie Borden did in the wonderful production that was actually telecast that you directed, mm-hmm, or of Mice and Men of Carlyle's. Why is it that works premiere, disappear, and then come back to us?
Well, because in this country, the arts are not supported by the government as they are in Europe. And so I think it's difficult for people to get funding for contemporary works. And that's too bad. It's very sad. That's why I loved working in Europe, because you could do so many wonderful pieces. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I wish we could do that here in this country. I wish the arts were supported.
Yeah. And of course, you worked in the Netherlands a lot. I know after New York City Opera, your Netherlands association was one of your longest associations.
Yes, and Belgium.
Yep.
And Spoleto in Italy with Giancarlo. Yes, Giancarlo.
Well, you're talking about some giant personalities. You mentioned Beverly and what she was like. What was Giancarlo like?
Oh, he was wonderful, and he was so open to ideas. If you brought an idea to him, he said, okay, let's try. Mm-hmm. He was wonderful. I really was so blessed to know these people.
Were there other general directors? Do other general directors come to mind who had that same openness to ideas, people you really liked working with?
Yes, I would say Hans de Roo at the Netherlands Opera, and the people at Belgium in Brussels.
Mm-hmm.
And they were so supportive, they were so curious. But they, of course, were supported by the government, unlike, unfortunately, here we are not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's very sad.
And of course, that certain government support enables you to be a bit more experimental, a bit more adventuresome.
That's right.
On a regular basis.
That's right.
Now, you also worked with a lot of composers. When I think about, of course, Anthony Davis, Robert Ward, Carlisle Floyd,
right.
Jack Beeson,
right.
Jake Heggie.
Yes.
They're all so different. I mean, they are all such great composers and very different people.
Yes.
As a stage director, how do you adjust to the personalities of your composers?
Well, you do as you adjust to people in life. It's just very simple. They're them, you're you, and you shift and you try and focus on their interests and what it is they're hoping to achieve in doing their piece. It's wonderful.
And again, you've worked with such a variety over the years. It's really amazing.
I know, I'm so blessed.
I wanted to have you talk for a moment about Play It by Ear.
Yes.
Oh. Because Play It by Ear, it combines opera and improvisation.
Yes.
And if you think about opera, one of the last words that comes to mind is improvisation.
I know.
Opera is big, complex, fixed in a way, and improvisatory music just the opposite. What did you do with Play It by Ear?
Oh, well, we spoke to the audience. We tried to find what their interests were. And then we would immediately create an opera based on what they told us. And the people in the company were brilliant. And I do wish that more schools would teach improvisation. I think we teach kids to be, well, I shouldn't call them kids, young people, to be obedient rather than imaginative. And that's very sad.
And in experimenting with improvisation, you felt that the individual artists grew as artists?
Oh, absolutely.
Because they discovered a certain what? How did the improvisation enhance the work of the artists?
Because they begin to trust their own imagination. Not mine, but theirs. And then they can contribute when we direct something, when we direct a classical work. And it's more of a dialogue with the director than a director being a director.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's much more interesting. Much more.
Now, you have taught, Rhoda, at some of the great educational institutions, whether it's Yale or Juilliard. Did you try to bring this improvisatory perspective into your work at the great schools?
Oh, sure. Sure.
And were the young people responsive to it? Did they understand what you were going for?
Yes, they absolutely loved it. They had fun. So much of educational work is not about fun, it's about being obedient. And I don't believe in that. My cat just walked.
I'm interested in this dichotomy between being a student and being obedient and being creative. Did you start out as a young artist being obedient and break out of those constraints, or were you kind of born improvisatory?
I was just liberated and had fun. I was not obedient.
Somehow I knew you'd say that, Rhoda. Right. In all of your years teaching young people at university, at conservatories, Curtis, Juilliard, Yale, all over, is there a common thread for those seeking a career as stage directors in opera, a common thread of advice that you would give them?
Well, I think it's about listening to the material that you're doing and basically listening to the actors who are going to perform, listening to their responses, not just being a dictator. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very important.
And how about what? The advice for young singers? Did you, what advice would you give them? There's so many singers who want to make a career, so few actually do. What advice in the university or in the conservatory, what advice did you give the singers?
To keep pursuing what they want to pursue. And if they have to do other things in order to do that, like I did, I worked, I was a waitress. I did all kinds of things, a babysitter, to continue doing what I wanted. And I think it's important. And I think those jobs add to your understanding of human life.
And so as you think back, Rhoda, over decades of your work in opera, are there particular companies you enjoyed, projects that mean more to you than any other projects? Are there some favorite moments of your opera work?
Well, I loved the Netherlands Opera, and I loved New York City and Beverly, and she gave me a chance to do things no one else would do, like the life and times of Malcolm X. Mm-hmm. And she was very responsive, which is in this country difficult because unlike Holland and Belgium, where I worked a lot, and Scotland, they're funded by the government. But this country it's appalling that we're not funded so that people can be a little more courageous in some of their choices because they're worried about funding.
Yeah, so true, so true. Rhoda, thank you. I know it's just so important to capture these minutes with you and to chat about this amazing career that you've had.
Well, thank you for thinking of me. I can barely think of me myself.
Oh my goodness. No, I mean, I remember you from City Opera days, from our time at Chicago Opera Theater when you directed pieces. Seeing your work at Opera Theater of St. Louis.
Oh my gosh, you remember that?
Absolutely. You've been a part of my opera life for my entire career.